We have been talking about green skills, and I think that it's an opportune moment right now to really fully unpack what we mean by green skills. Seeing by way of the trends in developing green skills, also what the challenges currently are, notwithstanding the coronavirus. UNIDO has put together a fantastic piece of research, of course, that has looked closely at this subject matter, specifically the green skills paper that they have worked with alongside their partners. And I'm loving the activity of engagement in the chat function. I will like to bring your attention to the fact that after seeing the presentation on the green skills paper, there'll be an opportunity to engage directly with the authors about their research. So I hope that you will watch with keen interest and really use the opportunity to ask perhaps anything that is not clear or that you'd like to know to strengthen your capacity, of course, to adapt and develop green skills in your respective countries. But on that note, let's see first that video before we get to discussing the green skills paper.
I'm delighted to present you today our background paper, framing the topic for the annual meeting, focused on green skills for a sustainable future. In the next few minutes, I will highlight the most important aspects we discuss in our report. As you may know already, the full report is available for you to read in more detail and to also comment on. I do hope this presentation will animate the discussion, bringing in the rich set of expertise present in this virtual event. By now, both developed and developing countries agree on the salience of transitioning towards more sustainable modes of production and consumption. Many countries have already taken ambitious steps towards greening the economy and increasing environmental awareness. Such initiatives, in the form of targets, incentives, regulations, and investments, have created new markets for green technologies, increasing the number of jobs in these sectors and expanding the demand for related skills. These trends are expected to accelerate in the coming future. To enable and support this process, education and training programs at different levels need to be able to respond to future demands on labor markets. Given this context, the main goal of this report is to raise critical questions and reflect on preconditions for managing the process of green skills development. To better understand why this is important and what some of the key challenges are, we discussed the concepts of green jobs and green skills, and we also examined the nature of employment effects from greening. Given the unprecedented nature of the transition towards sustainability and the associated uncertainties, we also inquire into what the future holds in terms of greening and what that means in terms of the necessary skills. Lastly, we highlight a few fundamental prerequisites for improving the effectiveness of green skills development programs. While the concepts of green jobs and green skills have become widely used in policies and research circles, they remain oftentimes vague in terms of the type of occupations and the types of tasks and skills they encompass. Moreover, these two concepts are often used interchangeably, which may create further confusion for policy implementation. Let us talk about green jobs first. The problem of defining this concept in a uniform way relates to several issues. First, there is a vast range of activities related to environmental sustainability, which makes it difficult to set conceptual boundaries and agree on what green should refer to. Second, it is not clear whether green jobs refer to both new jobs and to existing jobs that are reclassified as green. Lastly, accounting for jobs in the supply chain for particular technology is often difficult. As a result, various organizations have come up with their own definitions. For consistency in this report, we use ILO's definition, also reflected in this figure, which considers not only employment in the production of environmental outputs and environmental processes, but also non-green jobs in non-environmental sectors created due to greening. Moreover, ILO's definition also stresses that jobs should be decent, meaning good quality jobs, ideally in the formal sector, offering equal opportunities for men and women and appropriate social benefits. This table reflects to an extent the complexity around green jobs and associated tasks. Using data on the United States, Francesco Vona and colleagues group green occupations along two main dimensions. First, shown along the rows, whether the green occupation is new and emerging or existing but enhanced through retooling. The second dimension, shown in the columns, is the level of greenness, one being the highest, measured as the number of green specific tasks relative to total specific tasks. This classification gives us an overview of what types of occupations may comprise the green jobs category, and it also makes the point, it highlights that not all green jobs are equally green. While the green jobs concept is sometimes discussed interchangeably with green skills, it is important to highlight that differences do exist between these two concepts. ILO defines skills as the knowledge, competence, and experience needed to perform a specific task or job. As per OECD and the European Centre for the Development of Vocational Training, green skills are then those skills needed for adapting products and services and processes to transformations due to climate change, environmental regulations, and requirements. As such, the concept of green skills offers a much more disaggregated perspective on the labor market dynamics associated with greening the economy. Instead of focusing on green jobs, zooming into the necessary green skills enables policymakers to identify specific training and competence building interventions. Concretely, 4 groups of skills have been identified to be important for green occupations. First, engineering and technical skills, referring to hard skills important for design, construction, and assessment of a technology, usually mastered by engineers and technicians. This know-how prevails for eco-buildings, renewable energy design, and energy savings R&D projects. Science skills refer to competencies stemming from knowledge broad in scope and essential for innovation, for example, in physics and biology. Such skills are essential for environmental scientists, material scientists, or hydrology specialists, for instance. A third group of skills are operation management skills, referring to know-how related to change in organizational structure required to support green activities, lean production, as well as cooperation with external actors. Such skills are important, for example, for sales engineers, climate change analysts, sustainability specialists, and transportation planners. Lastly, monitoring skills refer to technical and legal aspects of business activities. They are important for occupations such as environmental compliance inspectors, emergency management directors, or legal assistants. Challenges in consistently defining green jobs are also reflected in difficulties in measuring the employment effect of greening the economy. While estimates of the net employment effects do vary, empirical evidence converges on the finding that green occupations are concentrated in low and high skilled jobs. More specifically, low-skilled jobs take up the largest share in both job creation and job destruction. Therefore, to assist workers to navigate this transition most effectively, meaning to make it possible for those who lose jobs to be reintegrated in the labor market, retooling or reskilling interventions are essential. A second important finding is that most of the net job gains will be in high-skilled jobs. This means that upskilling interventions will be critical in order to prepare workers for entirely new occupations. Also, train-the-trainer type of interventions will be important to enable closing the gap in demand. To summarize, empirical evidence shows that, as reflected in this table, for low-skilled occupations, the nature of change on skills is more generic in scope, focusing on retooling, calling for simple adaptation to work procedures. By contrast, medium and high-skilled occupations require either an entirely new set of skills associated with the new occupations, such as wind turbine operators or solar panel installers, or significant changes to existing occupations in terms of technical skills and knowledge, such as for roofers, technicians in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, architects, or engineers. Another important takeaway from existing empirical evidence is that the employment effects in terms of job creation and destruction are not uniform. First, they are not uniform across countries. Job creation and destruction are higher for non-OECD countries, which creates a much higher demand both in terms of reskilling and retooling. In fact, estimates show that some regions, especially fossil fuel-rich countries in the Middle East and Africa, may even see negative net effect on green employment. Not surprisingly, some sectors will also see less green jobs being created in so-called sunset sectors, that is energy-intensive sectors, while others will see more jobs, specifically in sunrise sectors. In terms of the types of skills, sectors such as agriculture and construction will see more jobs being created in low skills occupations, while transportation, utilities, business services will see more jobs being created in high skilled occupations. Lastly, empirical evidence shows that most job losses are expected for low-skilled workers, while most job gains are to be seen for medium and highly skilled workers. These impacts on the labor market will ultimately depend on the structure of the economy and on how well workers can adapt their skills and can switch across sectors from sunset to sunrise sectors. Therefore, skill development programs are essential for greening the economy. And as we will discuss later, actively engaging the private sector in such programs is of utmost importance. Given all these uncertainties and challenges in measurement, it is important both for policymakers as well as for the private sector to understand how fast markets are expected to develop for green technologies. Also, to be able to assess the impact on skills, it is critical to assess to what extent these new markets impact local manufacturing and innovation, specifically what kind of domestic technological capabilities may be associated with greening. A recent study we just published shows that these trends do differ between developing and emerging economies, both in terms of the speed of market development, as well as the type of technologies or green sectors that will play a role in greening. Such information is essential for aligning skill development programs to emerging demand. Without going into a lot of detail, let me just say that several dimensions help to explain how many jobs and what kind of skills are associated with greening the economy. First, the speed of market development or technology diffusion and the degree of technological sophistication will determine how many jobs are to be created and how complex the associated skills are. Specifically, the faster the market development and the more sophisticated the green technology is, the more jobs are created and the more complex the associated skills are. Our study of future greening helped us to roughly identify implications for developing countries. Solar PV, solar cooling, recycling, for instance, mature technologies with medium degree of technology sophistication are expected to diffuse rapidly in developing countries and to generate sizable job creation with a medium degree of complexity of the required skills. Other green technologies will impact differently the numbers of jobs and types of skills. These impacts would look different for emerging economies such as China and India, of course. Nevertheless, such information should then guide stakeholders involved in training on what may be the relevant intervention areas in the coming decade in specific context. So let us turn our attention to the prerequisites for effective green skills development programs. I focus here on two higher level aspects which affect all actors involved. First, suitable policies for creating demand for green skills are of course essentials and have been discussed in various reports. Various policy toolboxes have also been created to assist policymakers in identifying and mixing the right interventions. A second aspect, however, much more difficult to tackle is the process by which skill development programs are designed and implemented. Let me briefly discuss why both of these are important and how. On the policy side, more important than having the right policies for creating demand for greening the industry is to align these policies with specific green skills development programs. As this figure shows, while almost all countries have more or less ambitious policies for improving the environmental performance of their economies, shown on the vertical axis, very few have succeeded in aligning these policies with comprehensive skills development programs seen here in the green area. Ambitious environmental regulation, but poorly aligned with skill development policies such as in Egypt or even US, UK, seen here in the reddish circle, may contribute to creating a skill gap for green occupations, which ultimately could slow down or even compromise the green transition. These findings strengthen our argument that a focus on improving the process based on which the skills are to be developed is of utmost importance. We consider three processes-related aspects to be relevant: coordination across stakeholders, monitoring and evaluation of outcomes, and forecasting needs for training and retraining. Coordination across stakeholders is critical at policy planning stage, but also for identifying skills, training, as well as for community mobilization. Key here is engaging the private sector, especially the SMEs. Interesting examples where synergy across sectors and institutions has been in focus can be found, for instance, in South Africa, Ethiopia, Zambia, or India, and are discussed at greater length in the report. Monitoring and evaluation of outcomes is equally important for the public and the private sector, especially where training programs and institutions are weak, which is the case in most developing countries. Germany, for instance, does not have elaborated monitoring mechanisms for green skills, but its well-developed institutions and solid training programs, well embedded in the business environment and into the national innovation system, automatically provide the necessary checks and balances. Forecasting needs is also, for the regions mentioned before, key, especially for countries that have poor labor market information systems that can provide accurate information with regards to existing and future needs. Best examples can be found in France and Germany. But also countries such as Brazil, Estonia, or Bangladesh have recently started implementing such mechanisms, but they are still early on. So as a way to conclude this general assessment, let me summarize a few takeaway points to stimulate later the discussion. First, policy coherence across policy interventions to enable the transition and to develop the necessary skills is essential and should be achieved through a systematic process of stakeholder consultations. Developing a solid empirical base for existing green jobs and green skills and implementing systematic mechanisms to forecast needs is important to ensuring the needs that firms can be, that the needs of firms can be met and that the transition is not hampered. Lastly, at a higher level, coordination of goals and interventions across stakeholders and sectors, as well as monitoring and evaluation of outcomes, do emerge as fundamental preconditions for effective green skills development programs. With this, I close my short report overview and I open the floor for your questions and discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you for such an insightful report. And let's get into some of those questions, and specifically based on some of the key findings of the report, speaking to the importance of policy coherence, of course, in the development of the green skills and coordination of the goals, and also the importance of monitoring and evaluation in this. And as you can see, we do have the authors ready there with you to engage. I'd like to introduce you once again to Professor Georgeta Auktor from the German Development Institute, and joining her is Niels Schulz from the Industrial Development Officer, rather, who's joining us from UNIDO. And again, I am seeing the chats coming through, a fantastic set of comments. Do invite you to pose any questions if you have at this time, and also, of course, share your experience on social media. That hashtag is LKDF Forum 2020. Georgeta, I'd like to begin with you, and thank you for the fantastic presentation that you just gave us. Just how important do you think it will be that a post-COVID-19 recovery all over the world will have to involve a proactive development in green skills? And perhaps as you answer that, how feasible is pursuing that green skills agenda at this present moment, given that many countries and policy leaders are still to grapple with their policy response to the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you very much, Fifi, and welcome. Good morning first to everyone present here, and welcome to this very important event. So to your first question, absolutely, I really believe that, and as we have heard in the previous statements as well, that the post-COVID recovery should include very proactive programs to develop green skills. So why this is important? Well, we have seen that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected all societal groups, but it has definitely hit harder low-income groups, those in the informal sector, and also those that are generally in lower quality jobs. And in this group, within these social groups, we have seen also that unemployment and in particular also underemployment rates have skyrocketed. So building back better would definitely call for intensifying green skills development programs, especially since, as we have heard a bit earlier, this crisis was really a wake-up call for the importance of sustainable, inclusive development. And as I emphasized in my earlier presentation, greening the industry, we see through empirical evidence that greening the industry can also contribute to job creation and increase in income. So For these reasons, policymakers, the private sector, the investment sector should really seize the moment to put in place right policies and investments that will support green jobs and also green technology diffusion.
All right.
And on your second question, perhaps just to make a point that indeed it's quite challenging to at this time to dedicate scarce human and financial resources towards the design of long-term sustainable development strategies, as this may seem to be disconnected from priorities and realities on the ground, which include addressing the high unemployment rates I mentioned earlier, a health crisis, also a looming economic crisis. But as we have heard also before, the transition towards a green economy and the focus on sustainable development is really perhaps the only option that could promise a more resilient, a more secure, and also inclusive, equitable world. And for policymakers, this may be even an opportunity for fiscal recovery, for improving the fiscal space, improving tax collection systems so that governments could then reorient resources towards low carbon, efficient, clean production, and also towards social protection policies by shifting subsidies, for instance, from fossil fuels towards education, training, health goals.
Sure. So certainly just doing things differently than we have done before. And I tend to agree on your point of, focusing on the green agenda now as, potentially having that really jobs boosting impact, given the jobs that have been lost under the current pandemic, jobs that might not even come back. So the focus should be on increasing investments in the future. And Niels, I'd like your view here, because one of the findings of the research was, in order to really get the green skills agenda and the transition going and to make it smooth, there needs to be a political will. And in the presence of the political will, I imagine that there needs to be considerable support, particularly to developing institutions who I think the research has highlighted have a little bit of weaker institutions compared to the developed world. So just tell us a bit about what UNIDO is perhaps doing to support developing countries, how your organization is working with them to develop these greener jobs and ways of doing business.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, UNIDO, in this effort to assist countries in inclusive and sustainable industrial development, basically leans on four core functions it provides. Initially, the most relevant one traditionally is technical cooperation. So UNIDO does assist countries to transfer technologies together with the private sector. The second important function, most relevant function, is analytical and policy advisory services. And this green skills paper that Georgeta was just presenting is an example of that, where UNIDO is assisting countries to come up with a more coherent policy approach towards skills development and industrial development in general. The third core function UNIDO provides are normative functions, which are about improving standards and quality frameworks. So UNIDO works a lot on certification, for example, as this is often an important step to be able to access export markets, that you're able to align your industrial production to quality standards global. And the fourth main core function, how UNIDO is assisting emerging economies in skills development, are what we're doing here now at the moment, are convening functions, convening, knowledge transfer, networking, partnerships approaches. So partnerships are a way how UNIDO is engaging with partner countries. There are currently 6 partner countries, namely Ethiopia, Senegal, Morocco, Peru, Cambodia, and Kyrgyzstan, where there are country partnership program, and there are additional ones in the preparation pipeline, including Cote d'Ivoire, Egypt, Rwanda, and Zambia. And that is one way of engaging with developing countries that UNIDO is particularly boosting at the moment. And the LKDF, the host of this activity, is one example of such a partnership approach. The LKDF basically aims to be a platform for industrial skills development and training. So it aims to bring together government institutions, donors, of course. Without donors, nothing is possible, and much driven, of course, also the private sector under one umbrella to meet private sector demand of skilled workforce better, to reduce the skills mismatch that we're all aware of. And one particular feature that LKDF features is a constant monitoring of social, environmental, and economic impact of the project. So that is something that we really put emphasis on to reach the poverty reduction targets or others, to meet the environmental safeguard targets that we have, to meet projects, for example, in the water sector and the forestry sector. Or we have a couple of projects on heavy vehicle driving. Also, the transport sector is a very dynamic sector where things where a lot of environmental regulation applies on emission standards, for example, but also on green driving skills. Transport skills are recognized as such. And there are 3 core functions of the LKDF. One is results-based learning, which aims at summarizing and sharing best practices and lessons learned of skills development programs, and that's where those green skills are featured. The second core function of LKDF relates to management and training of decision makers in vocational training schools and in the skill education sector. And the third component is project development to ensure the long-term financial success of TVET facilities. Those are ways how LKDF and UNIDO is assisting emerging economies in developing green skills.
Perfect. And, Georgeta, just to come back to you regarding how governments can certainly push forward on the green agenda right now, as in Africa to a less degree, our COVID-19 has impacted us to the same degree as the rest of the world. Of course, it also depends on how you view that side of the argument. Some do say that our level of testing wasn't as high as was in other parts of the country. But nonetheless, we have been impacted by the economic degradation that the health crisis that mutated into a and economic one brought. We agree, I believe everyone in this platform so far, judging by all the interactions that we have received from the audience, that it is time for us to talk about the acceleration of green skills and the green skills agenda. So if you had to, briefly for us, give key areas that the governments and perhaps local enterprises should be focusing on right now to quicken the pace of that acceleration, given everything else that they are facing economically, what would those brief points be?
Thank you, Fifi. Of course, this is a very important, question. Let me just start by saying that the COVID crisis is very similar to the climate crisis. So market failures are present, externalities are very large, and international cooperation is very much needed. Also, action has to be based on complex science, system resilience is important, and also political leadership hinges really on public support. So an important lesson here, both for governments and for the private sector, is that acting with delay would come with a very huge cost. So prevention is definitely better than cure. And as specific interventions that governments could keep focus to stimulate job creation, and with that, of course, related interventions to develop relevant skills would be I would mention here, for instance, public procurement, especially in energy sector or government work programs. Public procurement programs do provide direct employment opportunities that are funded by the government, and also focusing on targeted business stimulus. This would be the green conditionality that we have heard also earlier, and we hear more and more in the European context. Canada has also focused on green conditionality for building back better. This would be types of such targeted business stimulus would offer the necessary incentive for the private sector to act in integrating sustainability and environmental aspects into their production and processes. For instance, bailouts with green strings attached, conditions on firms, on emissions, on pollution, for supply chain requirements, requiring compliance to voluntary standards or reporting standards. These are important instruments to keep in mind. Green R&D subsidies, subsidies or tax reductions for green products. This would also be such interventions. Another area with a lot of potential for job creation, especially for low-skilled workers that are more vulnerable during these times, would be natural capital investment, for instance, afforestation programs, restoration of wetlands, forest management investments. These are great for creating jobs, and we have seen such programs in Ethiopia, Pakistan, India. They are labor intensive. They do not require initially large retraining. The technology requirements are low, so this would be short-term interventions that may be considered.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there. We do have 4 questions that have come through from the audience, and we've got around 2 or 3 minutes left. I have 2 or 3 minutes left with you, so I need to make the most of it. Niels, could you comment very briefly on the role of the digital platforms for green skills development measure?
Yeah. As a response to the COVID pandemic, UNIDO had been working in most of its support of the Tibet sector in developing virtual means of Tibet education, and the LKDF the LKDF homepage, in fact, is one repository of certain skills catalogs, and provides a kind of curated platform of skills. And depending on the different projects in the different countries, there are thematic themes. For example, in Morocco, there was a big project on water sector, H2O Maghreb, where there were also virtual aquatron simulation platforms available that allows to simulate and to learn something virtually before applying it in the active world. So that is something where UNIDO was already active partly before the COVID-19 pandemic, but which certainly gave an additional boost and additional need, given that in many countries the vocational training centers had to were forced to keep students out and try to get it on the line. But of course, there are remaining issues with being able to access, given that the bandwidth outside of institutional hosts like those vocational training centers often is quite slow. So there are challenges remaining, and of course also didactic challenges that not everything can be told virtually. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Just a quick one. Mind you, I am going to eat into your lunch for 2 minutes, if you will just allow me to do so. Professor, there was a question regarding the comment that you made on skills. So the question reads, how can there be scarce resources in terms of people for developing programs if there are so many people without work? Or did they misunderstand something in how you presented that?
So what I highlighted is that there is a skill mismatch. So not that there are not enough people to do the green jobs, because of there is a high level of unemployment and underemployment in the labor markets in most developing countries, but rather that the needed skills are not present in the market currently, but also given the expected trend development in the markets for green technology. So we see that in the next decade, most green technologies are expected to deploy at relatively rapid rates across developed and developing countries. However, what we see also is that green skills development programs are lacking behind in a lot of countries. So this focus has to be has to be strengthened, and efforts in this direction have to be accelerated so that this skill mismatch that we see can be addressed.
Understood. And I hope the person that asked the question also understood you there loud and clear. Thanks to the both of you. Thank you so much.